I knew that writing was the only thing I could do. And when I wrote, it was like fighting the darkness. It was pushing all that.
When I wrote, it was like fighting the darkness. Leave it to Anne to give us the best analogy for being an artist, right? Hello, I am Joel Sharpton, one half of the Articulate Coven, and I want to say thank you to everybody who has subscribed to the YouTube channel and everybody who has, suggested and pushed for us to come over here and start doing more stuff. In particular, I want to say a thank you to, let me find it, I've got it here somewhere. Yes, Zach Brahani said, in terms of future content, 3 topics I can imagine covering: the film adaptations of Feast of All Saints, The Young Messiah. Both of those are good suggestions. Honestly, I'd forgotten that there are other movies, adaptations of Anne's works that we haven't done already. We did early on, we did Interview with the Vampire from 94. We did Queen of the Damned from the early 2000s. And we've now redone both of those as commentaries as well in between season 1 and 2 of Interview with the Vampire, but we've never covered Feast of All Saints, and we've never covered The Young Messiah. I honestly forgot that that one was an adaptation of her Jesus books. I really like her Jesus books. Anyway, that's a different discussion. What I'm here today to do is to react to the Charlie Rose interview from 1993. Over the course of the next few weeks, we're going to do, I think, all of the Charlie Rose interviews with Anne. She did one in 93, I think one in 95, one in 96, one in 97, and then 2 in 98, I believe. So anyway, we've got all of those, and my co-host Ashley and I are going to take turns going back and forth and reacting to these videos for you. I'll tell you, this is how much this is a first reaction for me. I don't even know what book this is for. I didn't look it up to see what book came out in 93 or which one she's talking about here. So here we go.
Anne Rice brought vampires back from the dead. Before her best-selling Vampire Chronicles, they were mainly seen as campy, unappealing B-movie types with a little erotic appeal. Anne Rice made them sexy and asked the big questions about the relationship between immortality and immorality. The first
Okay, that's all true. It's 100% true. Vampires were not in the mainstream for like pop culture or horror stuff especially when she wrote Interview, but really they weren't there even when she wrote The Vampire Lestat. And that's when it started to hit, honestly, in pop culture. Interview with the Vampire was kind of a cult hit until The Vampire Lestat came out. And around that time, Queen of the Damned is the one that like changed her life as far as the book sales count.
Vampire Chronicle, Interview with the Vampire, is now being made into a movie by Neil Jordan. And now Anne Rice has just published a sequel to The Witching Hour, which told the tale of the Mayfair family of witches. It is now called, this new book is called Lasher, and we are pleased to have her here at long last. Welcome.
Okay, so Lasher is my favorite of the 3 Mayfair books. Taltos is weird. The Witching Hour is so big. Lasher is big and there's a lot of story to it, but it feels like a more straightforward adventure to me, although I haven't revisited it in adulthood. So it's probably going to be very problematic when I do.
Thank you very much.
We tried, when we came to New Orleans, we tried to find you. We've been
really?
looking for you.
Well, I'm very happy to be here.
Let me thank you very much. It's great to have.
Okay, one of the reasons I love these Charlie Rose interviews, I didn't appreciate Charlie Rose show when I was, when these were coming out. Most of his guests were people that I didn't really know or didn't appreciate or didn't want to listen to. And it was slow and it's like, there's no background. It's just the black sets, with the spotlight on the two, or the interviewer and the interviewee. But one thing that I did always love, and I really did always watch these interviews when they happened at the time, when I could get around to, when I could remember that they were on. The reason that I love them so much is because Charlie was clearly a book reader. He read these books. He liked Anne as a writer and an author, and he was not fanboying, but he was very excited to have her on his show. And that's not always true for talk show hosts, right?
Let me just go back to, it's such an extraordinary life that you have lived, and I want to talk a little bit about growing up and parents and family. Your father was a postman, was he?
Actually, he worked in the post office department of the government.
But was a sculptor?
He worked on his sculpture and his writing at night. He kept a workshop until his very last years, right up to the very end, actually, in which he did sculpture out of marble and wood and more or less followed his own star. working in kind of what people would call primitive.
Can we just appreciate Anne's seriousness? And even when she's laughing, she always had such a serious demeanor about her. It's just like deathly playing it straight. It's never a satire with Anne.
Forms.
What kind of influence on you?
Oh, profound influence. Just to do something important, you know, from early childhood, he was always working on something. He was either writing and he would, you know, write at night. Right there, he'd write these chapters and he'd read them to us and see how we felt about them. And then later, when he gave up the writing, it was the sculpture, the woodwork. And
how many sisters?
Eventually 4. And my mother died, my father remarried, and then a 5th sister.
I think it's always intriguing to learn a bit and to be reminded about Anne's family history. I think it is very formative on her work, as it is on all of our, you know, artistic output, of course. But in particular, it's nice to be reminded she was a daddy's girl. Like, she was much closer to her father, and not imitated, but, you know, followed her father in life closer than her mother.
And your mother, the influence of your mother?
Again, profound. I have only happy memories of her, really, and she was a great storyteller in the wonderful Southern Irish Catholic tradition. She was just a fabulous storyteller.
A free spirit, though.
Very much so, but also very Catholic, intensely Catholic. She believed that, you know, we should go to Mass every morning, that the Blessed Sacrament was on the altar, and we should get out of bed and walk over there to church and go to Holy Communion.
But what was the free spirit quality?
You can do anything with your life. You can be Anna.
The Mayfairs, there's several of them that hold to this exact same pattern. And I remember hearing when she was talking about those novels that this was part of her own background.
Lola, or you can be Emily Bronte. Nothing needs to stop you. And she never inculcated any ideas into us that being a woman would be a limitation.
Yeah.
So we lived in a
An
world
early
of
feminist,
women.
was she?
Yes, she was, in many respects, a feminist. And somehow or other, she maintained the strict Catholicism and almost a Southern belle.
It's literally both sides of Anne, right? the paranormal, wild gypsy girl, and also a very strict Catholic upbringing.
Reticence in personal behavior.
And you were writing horror stories, though, when you were a teenager.
Right, a kid. Mm-hmm.
If, by the way, this is off the topic completely, but if you haven't looked at the Alphabetary, which is like a collection, it's basically like an encyclopedia for Anne's work. It was done in the late 20-teens by her assistant at the time, Beckett. Really, really well done. And the opening of that is a long forward from Anne that describes her like inner worlds. She's got obviously the worlds that she created in her novels, but she's got an inner world that she's been maintaining these stories, totally imaginary characters of like a whole town. And she's been doing it her entire life. I mean, obviously now she's passed away, but this is something that she details in great detail in the Alphabetary in the opening of that. Go check it out.
Science fiction, anyway.
Yeah. But here's what's strange. I think strange, maybe not. You would go, is this true? You would go to the cemetery and walk around? I mean, you...
Oh, yes, but everybody
did
that.
that.
Of course you went to the cemetery.
Right, our cemeteries are really
They're
beautiful.
all above ground, first of all.
They're all above ground, they're walled and gated, and you
Yeah.
go in, and it's like a park, and in those days, they were open all the time. Now they lock them up.
Yeah.
After COVID, you can only go in on tour, actually.
And they take much better care of them. In those days, they just sort of languished in a sublime peace and quiet. And frequently we stroll through there. And I remember my father pointing out the graves of the families who died during yellow fever.
Yeah, one of my wonderful memories with my father is that he took me to the family seminary, which was big, just family members, and he could go through it and tell you who everybody was and what they did and what they were like and who the children, and tell you stories. I mean, it was a fount of storytelling about family, you know, which is too little of that, I think, now, you know,
Well,
as we live
we
our
don't
life.
value it as much, and we've moved away from it a bit, I think. But,
You then went on to you were in Richardson, Texas. You lived in Texas, and you went to what might have been, was it North Texas State, or did you go to the Texas State School for
I went
something?
to North Texas State, and I went to Texas Women's University. I went 1 year to one and 1 year to the next, and then went out.
North Texas, by the way, was or is still, well, no, they're not in the same conference anymore. They were a longtime opponent of my school, Louisiana Tech. Go Dogs. How about them Dogs?
to California.
But before that, you got married, Did you?
I got married later. I came back from California, got married, and went to North Texas again, and same problems occurred. We couldn't really support ourselves in a small town.
He's a
like
writer as
Denver.
well, or a teacher?
Yeah, Stan, my husband of 32 years, the love of my life.
Yes. And what's the secret to this relationship? I mean, because it is clear that
They were both completely enamored with one another. Stan is a really interesting character. He's a very good poet and a painter, but they were enamored with each other. That's the secret.
You know, I've been thinking about that a lot. I think the capacity to fight may be the secret, to have raging, storming arguments over whether something is a good movie or not, whether a piece of music is really
And immediately proving me
a great
wrong.
accomplishment or not, and whether you should put a sofa this way or that way in a room, and whether you should go to dinner at 6 or 7. I think
All of my friends who are from New Orleans, they all argue with me if I try to go to dinner before 8. Even if I go at 8, they're like, "Oh, we're going with the old people." Dinner in New Orleans is 9:30 earliest.
if you can fight, if you can get angry, if you can let it out, and you can let all these verbal storms happen, you can learn from each other.
and knowing and having some value for the fact that, no, you can fight, but you would never fight so much that you would endanger the relationship.
Oh,
Always
no,
knowing that the relationship itself.
Yeah. Well, it's been for me like a great love affair. You know, I can't speak for my husband. I think he'd say the same thing. But really, I mean, those are my words for it. It's a great, stormy love affair. And after 32 years.
Ooh, a great stormy love affair. That brings to mind a line from season 2. One more entry into the stormy romance of you two.
More about that later, because I want to talk about that, because when you, as we look through what some of the things you did, I want to talk first about Interview with a Vampire and how you came to write that in 1976, because, you know, you went through that sort of, when you were living in San Francisco, that obsession with Louisiana.
Well, I did, yeah. I went through
Tell
that.
me about it.
I began to think about New Orleans and actually pine for it, long for it.
She was obviously born and raised in New Orleans, and then she and her husband now and her family, her young family, are in San Francisco.
Painfully. And I started to go to the library and read everything they had on the history of New Orleans, which they actually had quite a lot of in the Berkeley Library, and then in the University Library, too. I found the Louisiana Historical Quarterly and go through the issues just reading articles on the way houses were in the 1700s and the 1800s, and I acquired a great deal of information. And I began writing home to my family and saying, why was this way in our church parish? Why do we have 2 churches instead of 1? You know, wasn't that weird? What was going on? And the family began to tell me the history of the Irish Channel, where I, went to school, and where some of them had lived. And I just got more and more deeply immersed in it.
And of course, all of that Irish Channel stuff really influenced the character of Michael Curry in The Witching Hour and Lasher and the rest of the Mayfair books. The character, by the way, who is not in the TV show. I love you, Cyprian, but you're no Michael Curry.
And I saw down the line novels that would involve all this, but I had no idea the first one would be Interview with the Vampire.
But did you know you were going to write a novel?
Oh yeah, I was definitely steaming along with that idea.
Yeah.
I was majoring in political science and things like that in college, but
BT Dub, I'm also a political science major, political science and theater. That was my double major.
all the time I would go back to writing.
This was at San Francisco State, was
yes,
it? Yeah.
I got a BA in political science.
Why Interview with a Vampire? And how did that happen?
It was almost an accident. It started as a short story. I just wrote it one night thinking, what would it be like if you could get a vampire to really tell you what it was like to drink human blood, to take life? Is it a sacramental thing? I mean, who knows? So I started this interview with the vampire, and I really was the vampire giving the interview, not the interviewer. And I kept that story and rewrote it several times. And at one point I pulled it out. It was after my daughter had died, about 9 months after her death. And I started to...
So this, by the way, is a good reminder. We always, I say we, I'm not going to speak for anybody else. I often chalk up Interview with the Vampire, the whole reason it exists, as Anne's response to her daughter's death. But it's not really true. The germ of this idea had already existed. She had already tried a swipe at this story a few times before her daughter passed away.
Work on it, and it began to grow into this absolutely bizarre novel in which...
Obviously, that daughter's death did influence the character of Claudia in particular, and I think also some of the moroseness of Louis. She said several times, like, she inhabited, at that moment in her life, she was Louis, sort of like stuck in the ennui of life. And for most of the rest of her career as a writer, she became Lestat. Lestat was the one that was speaking through her and to her, and that she was living vicariously through, because she had sort of like moved past, not that she'd gotten over her daughter's death. That's never what I mean, but that she had moved past that grief stage.
There is the notion that the 6-year-old child is in a sense was because of a connection to your daughter who died of leukemia.
It must have been. It must have been, but the truth is I didn't see it. I mean, if I had been thinking that at the typewriter, this is about my 6-year-old child who just died, I wouldn't have been able to write. So I was thinking, oh, what if they make a child a vampire,
But did you give that child, you subconsciously gave that child the qualities of your daughter, Michelle?
Yes, but not the personality or anything. I mean, Claudia, all the characters, once they're born in the novel.
Yeah, it's writing as therapy, not writing as conscious rebuke or she's not consciously processing. It's a therapeutic sort of nature as these ideas and concepts flow.
They take on their own speech characteristics and their own personalities, and they really do take off. Lestat, who to me is the hero of all the vampire books.
And he's the man that you would be if you were a man.
Absolutely.
Right.
Exactly.
I've said this in the podcast before, but I believe if Anne was even just a few years younger, she may have identified as a trans man. She's said several times on record, and some I think she even says it in these Charlie Rose interviews, but she definitely said it in like her Facebook Live posts that she would do at different times. She's always sort of warred with her own gender, and she's never put herself, or very rarely, I should say, put herself into her novels. The character that she identifies with and sort of speaks through is almost never a woman. I mean, it was Louis here in Interview with the Vampire. It's Lestat later. It's Michael Curry in the Mayfair novels. I don't know. I think that's interesting.
And why is that? What is it about him that makes him the man that you would be?
Oh, boy. Well, he's powerful. He's capable of doing all the things that I'm reticent to do.
Like what?
Okay.
Go anywhere he wants to go.
So later in the book, she will write this exact character, a woman who can go anywhere she wants to go, and in Pandora especially, and Akasha to a degree as well. But I think Pandora specifically speaks to these sort of desires for Anne.
Walk in the dark.
Have anything he wants.
Well, to some extent. He's actually pretty conscience-bound about a lot of things. But when faced with an impossible situation, he'll do something, and I'm not sure I will.
What do you think now is our fascination with vampires, and what is your fascination with vampires? Because lots of people have speculated on your fascination. Mm-hmm. But tell me, why is it that this is a fertile ground for fiction?
I think, first of all, they are fabulous characters to work with. They are fabulous metaphors for the monster in all of us, for the outcasts in our midst. I mean, they really are. That's a given. All you have to do is start writing about it and feeling it and looking at things through their eyes, and all of that comes. It's like discovering a treasure trove. It's really fabulous. I didn't do that. It was there. It was right there in the material.
I mean, she's completely right on this. The very earliest modern vampire stories that we think of, Camilla and Dracula, are both very queer coded. And Camilla's not even coded. It's openly queer literature, really. And I think the vampire has always spoken to the outsider. Having just this year gotten the X-Men 97 reboot, restart, whatever you want to say, to that animated series, like, it puts a lot of those things that in the past have been subtext or like heavy metaphor up on Front Street, and it makes the message that the original creators always intended much more clear. I think the same thing is true for the AMC adaptation of Interview with a Vampire. A lot of people are like, well, in the books, they're not like that. Yes, they are. They always were.
But you did you see it as you just fell into it, and therefore you realized it was all there?
Absolutely. Especially in those days, I wrote that way. I didn't know what was going to happen
next. This was 76 or so, right?
About 74 and 5.
I always say 1974 when I'm talking about Interview with a Vampire, by the way, but I forget it wasn't published until 76. But I mean, I remember she was writing in 74. I think about the story as taking place in 74.
A couple of publishers rejected it. I mean, nobody saw it as a wonderful beginning.
Rejected it. And then my editor at Knopf loved it. Yeah. So we were off and running.
But it wasn't reviewed well. I mean, it wasn't in the beginning. It wasn't reviewed well, was it?
It got mixed reviews.
Mixed
it
reviews.
actually got wonderful reviews in Washington and Chicago and different places, but it got a bad review in the New York Times, and that means mixed reviews.
Yes.
That's all you need is
There
a
were
bad mix.
999, and the New York Times was one, so it was mixed.
Exactly.
It was like,
So that's really what happened to it.
but did it have some fascination with you about immortality? As I said, this notion that they don't
Who's
die.
not interested in
Definitely.
immortality?
It was a dark book, and it was about Louis the vampire
Right.
being seduced into the whole thing and then finding it monstrous and impossible, and yet not wanting to give up eternal life. So it was certainly, it must have been about my leaving the Catholic Church, leaving that whole wonderful...
Why did you lose your faith?
To stop believing the Catholic Church was the one true church established by Christ to give grace.
Did you accept something else?
No.
Matter of fact, serious, straightforward, Charlie.
You just
wanted
lost
to
faith in
explore.
that particular church?
I lost faith, totally. It was an agonizing process. It took about a year, but I lost faith. I wanted to read Jean-Paul Sartre and Kierkegaard. And
so you went into
find out
existentialism and everything else?
Yeah, I wanted to read writers like Kafka.
Right.
That would be a condemned writer for a Catholic girl.
And so where did you end up, though? Where are you today?
Today,
It'd be too nice to say you're a lapsed Catholic.
oh, I'm not lapsed.
You
No,
lost faith.
I left.
You
Yeah.
left. You
I
said-
left, right. No, I'm not lapsed at all, but
I chose, thank you very much. Anne's religious journey is one of the most fascinating parts of her life to me. And it's fascinating because it shows up in her literature. It shows up in her writing. And it's something that resonates with me very deeply. I'm not Catholic. I was not raised Catholic. I've never been a Catholic, but I was raised very religious, fundamentalist, free will Baptist. And since I was 5 or 6, I've been warring with those ideas and how they connected and played out in the real world, and what I thought about what that meant for the universe and an afterlife and my purpose in all of this. And has those arguments and those discussions and those thoughts out loud in her books, and I love it. I've always loved it.
today I feel more optimistic about there being something to all this than I ever felt when I was younger. When I was younger,
something to religion.
yeah, it's something to, something after death, some meaning to all this, some system, some wisdom behind it, some great scheme. I feel more optimistic about that than ever. I'm beginning to think that in my youth, when I was sure there was nothing, that was rather cocky.
Yeah.
So I
always feel that way when people say they don't believe in aliens. I'm like, how overconfident can you be? Like, why would we be the only ones?
I find myself being more open-minded about all kinds of religious ideas, and I'm reading a great deal in religious history right now, and a lot of books.
I remember
about
something when I'm a Protestant, but I remember something that you have to be lost before you can be found, or something like that.
Perhaps so.
There is some notion that you have to first be lost before you can be found. The death of your daughter influenced you how? I mean, there was a terrible period of alcoholism and a lot of other things where you just lost yourself.
Yeah.
You can't deal with the pain.
Yeah, that's true. I never thought about it in any analytical way, how it influenced me. I knew that writing was the only thing I could do, and when I wrote, it was like fighting the darkness. It was pushing all that.
When I wrote, it was like fighting the darkness. Leave it to Anne to give us the best analogy for being an artist, right?
That absurdity and horror away. It was making something. It was doing something positive. So I would write, and I really didn't directly relate my writing to her death in any way.
But now when you look back, people might, in from a distance, say she lost her face, she lost her daughter, she lost her mother.
Yeah, that's true.
And all of that sort of flowed into a mighty river that influenced your...
Well, my mother told me once, she said pain can either make you very cold and hard and insensitive, or it can make you very sensitive to the feelings of others. And I never forgot that. And it seems to me that
pain can make you cold and hard or make you very sensitive to the pain of others.
Pain can destroy you, but if you can survive it, you're going to be better for it. That doesn't necessarily justify it. I mean, it's too dangerous a teacher.
Pain is too dangerous a teacher.
For that to justify
and
it.
you
but
don't wish it on anybody.
No,
but if it comes,
not at all.
It might very well strengthen you.
No, how much better to learn everything from, trout fishing.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. You probably do learn something from trout fishing.
According to Robert Redford, you
patience, maybe. Yes, patience is what it is, and some kind of belief that, some kind of triumph of hope. But you turned after that to historical novels. You wrote those two historical novels.
She didn't turn. Interview with the Vampire didn't work, like, as far as sales goes. And so she said, okay, well, paranormal isn't it. So what else do I have in me? And she tried Cry to Heaven and Feast for All Saints, I think, in the other order. But I think she did have interest in those novels, and I think she would have written them anyway. But she wouldn't have written them next, I don't believe, if she wasn't trying to find something that worked.
I had two I really wanted to write. The third one hadn't revealed itself, Cry to Heaven, but Feast of All Saints, the one about the free people of color in New Orleans, I had been dreaming of that long before Interview
And that's
with the
part of your
Vampire.
obsession with
Yes,
Louisiana
that was a
and all
great
that.
deal. That was one book I definitely wanted to write and totally researched. I knew more about those people, really, than I knew about my own Irish background.
And those were they weren't very successful either, were they? In a broader
Those novels,
sense.
they'd never captured the
When we
popular
talk about you, we talk
audience.
about now.
No, The Vampire Lestat, which was the fourth one that I wrote, that's the one that actually became a bestseller. Yeah.
And what about the erotic stuff?
All right, Charlie.
You mean the pornography?
Yes.
What about the porn?
Well, yeah,
what about the
pornography.
porn,
When you
Anne?
wrote under the name of, sadomasochism, and you wrote under the name of Anne Rampling, right? Anne Rampling and A.N. Roquelaure.
Roquelaure.
Right.
Roquelaure is the name that I can always remember Anne Rampling. Roquelaure in my head is always Rolliquier, and I put the L before the Q. But also, those are the novels that I sort of forget exist.
What was that about?
Well, that was very similar.
This is actually what I'm really interested in.
I
All this
understand.
vampire witches stuff. The heck with that. I want to get to.
You're telling on
it.
yourself,
Get to
Charlie.
it, yes. I want to get to this love affair and how you feel about sex and fantasy.
Oh, God. Well, my life is very boring. Let me tell you. It's just very
Yes,
conservative.
of course it is.
But I do.
But your imagination.
My imagination is a theme park.
Boy, you should listen to some of the episodes of her son's podcast, The Dinner Show, where Anne is a guest, because this is apparently totally true. Like, she was so white bread, milquetoast, and like went to bed early every night, and basically had done that most of her life. She had a very active fantasy life, though, for sure.
And so that's what inspired
theme park
the theme park.
with any ride going anywhere.
Yes, exactly. And that's what inspired those books, is wanting to put down these fantasies and wanting to put them down in a way that was apart from the harsh realities of the world and the gruesomeness of literal violence and cruelty. You know, I wanted to make this place like Disney World, where you could go and you could play. Yeah, well, you could play with these fantasies of dominance and submission.
Right.
And it was all in a safe place, and then you could put that book down without experiencing anything
And you
jarring
think that's
and
healthy
awful.
to be able to.
Man, so many concepts that Anne talked about in the 90s and especially the early 2000s. I mean, she's like 20 years ahead of pop culture and mainstream society in our country in a lot of ways.
For your go ahead, tell me why.
I think it's very healthy, and I think it's very, very important for women to explore their fantasies. They have the right to explore their fantasies, and they usually don't. They use, I think men are very good at exploring their fantasies, and there's a great deal out there that indicates that men do this, that they want to know what they fantasize, and they do what they want. They go to big cities, to dominatrices and beautiful brothels, apparently, or so we're always told by the dominatrice in an interesting book, that all her clients were senators and all of this.
Right, exactly.
But women often don't get what they want, and they don't even know what they want. And I wanted to write what turned me on, really, and see if it didn't turn everybody else on.
And you found out, what kind of letters did you
I don't think there's any doubt what turns Anne on.
get for that kind of
Actually, I don't get too many letters on the beauty books, but the beauty books at
The
this
beauty
point,
books,
that's what I was Claiming a Sleeping Beauty, et cetera, et cetera. But those books now are just selling like mad. They're collectively
It's my understanding the books still sell pretty well. Her erotica books.
outselling Interview with the Vampire, which continues to sell
And why
more
do you
every
think
year.
that is? Or what, is it just that you think that the fact that because you have always been forthright about saying, I wrote this.
Oh yeah, I was from the very beginning. They've just grown and grown and grown in popularity, and now they've reached that magical numerical point where word of mouth carries them, even even if people don't know anything about the author Anne Rice or her other books. In fact, I've met a number of people who said, I've never read your other stuff, but I sure loved your dirty books. I should write some more.
Again, she did write. She wrote a 4th Sleeping Beauty book eventually.
Do you intend to write any more?
No, I did it.
You did it. So all the fantasy you had, you expressed there.
Pretty much. It gets pretty repetitive. I had a lot of fun with it, but it's a different season.
So 6 in all? How many were there? 6?
3.
3 in all.
3, and then the Anne Rampling novel Exit to Eden that they're making into a movie right now.
Who's making it?
Gary Marshall is making it.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
I mean, it probably has a good chance of being good then.
Yeah, I think it'll be very light and very much a love story.
Exit to Eden, the movie, was not good. Rosie O'Donnell and Dan Aykroyd play the leads, and I'm fairly certain Dan Aykroyd's character is invented entirely for the film. I don't think that character exists at all in the novel.
Well, I hope not offend the S&Mers.
But they also jumped on you about your vampires because you made them into sort of androgynous characters, and that you made the actual sucking of the blood and androgynous experience. And I mean,
they're queer, Charlie.
I thought that's
you thought what?
I thought that's what it would be. The drinking of the blood, that it would be erotic. Sure, it would be intimacy if you lived off the blood.
Yeah, how could it not be? How could it not be an erotic experience, honestly? Like, how can you... I find it difficult to imagine vampirism in any way that does not make it a very sexual experience. Maybe that's just me.
That must be a tremendous need and desire and erotic charge when you get it. That's what I thought. I don't know. I don't get letters from vampires either too often.
Why then did you turn to witches? The Witching Hour.
Well,
which was led into this book.
At this point, I'm really in love with the supernatural novel, with the whole idea of using the supernatural in fiction. And I think you can take
to do what?
To write the best books you can write.
Look, Anne didn't do this by herself, but it is unquestionable that there's been an elevation of the supernatural novel, of supernatural fiction, to literary level. And they can win Pulitzers, they can win any other sort of book prize that you want, even if the story that you want to tell involves the supernatural or the paranormal.
I mean, obviously, when I'm writing about a supernatural theme, for me it becomes very, very intense, and I'm able to tell all I know and all I feel about life. So it works for me. Somebody else might be completely different. They would need to write about marriage, divorce, whatever. Not me. When I'm writing a book like Lasher or The Witching Hour, I'm totally involved with what I care about. It's obviously something metaphorical there. It's symbolic. It's removed. It's but it's no more removed than Faust is removed from reality, or Macbeth.
No more removed than Faust or Macbeth from reality. I like that. I don't think I've remembered her saying that. But that's very poignant, and she's right. It's no more removed than Faust. Maybe a little bit more removed from reality than Macbeth. I mean, I guess there's a ghost in Macbeth too.
Can you characterize your vision?
Well, I think the books do different things, many different things, and it's very hard to talk about that without rambling around and sort of circling the books. But they talk about the struggle of people to live in a world where there is no clear revelation. They talk about the struggle of people to be good in spite of finding themselves now to be bad, like Lestat when he's made a vampire against his will, really.
I'm reading The Vampire Lestat, or I'm rereading The Vampire Lestat now for the umpteenth time, and this was one of the things that I loved so much, is that even before he becomes a vampire, he has sort of a loss of faith moment in his life where he realizes the big questions, the answers that he's had to them his whole life so far, don't count anymore. They don't cut it. And he literally panics. He runs. How can you live if you didn't believe, I think this is something that Anne struggled with her whole life.
They talk about people trying to band together, trying to love each other, trying to overcome isolation. The Mayfair family is a wonderful clan to work with and deal with the way love works in a family and the way the cousins relate.
The way the cousins relate, huh? They relate. They relate a lot.
The vampires are always seeking just a couple of other vampires who understand the way they feel, trying to make some community. They always fail because they're damned. They take human life. In some way, they cannot be redeemed, but they know it. And dealing with the conscience of Lestat or the conscience of Louis in Interview with the Vampire, that's very important to me.
To deal with the conscience, their sense of...
Their conscience, how it tortures them that they have to kill, how with each death they learn more and more the value of life. It's all of it.
And you want them to be seen as sympathetic characters?
They're very sympathetic.
Sympathetic, not good, right? These are not morally ambiguous or ambivalent either. They are morally bad. She just said it. These vampires take life on a regular basis, on an ongoing basis. As long as they survive, they will take life. But sympathetic. I think that is something that fundamentally people misunderstand. We're supposed to fall in love with Lestat, but we're in love with our demons at that point. Like, that's the idea. He's supposed to be the darkest parts of ourselves and that attraction that we have to them. He's not supposed to be your boyfriend. I mean, he can be mine, but he's not supposed to be yours.
Yeah. I mean, amazingly sympathetic. I mean, from what the readers tell me, I'm even surprised. I remember once meeting a high school student from Utah, and she said, everyone in my school is expecting Lestat to save them. And I thought, don't trust him if you meet him. You know, that may not be what he has in mind, you know. But, you know, they identify with him. They really do.
I used to say that every day a new Led Zeppelin fan is born because every day there's a new 12-year-old. And there's something about like the angst of being 12 and 13 that Led Zeppelin really speaks to, and I think probably always will. I think the same thing happens when you get to that point in life and you begin to question those big answers about the universe. And Anne's not the only writer. Lestat's not the only character that can be there for us in those moments, right? Like, some of us found another answer, I'm sure, but Lestat's who I found. Anne is who I found when I had those questions.
It's an overused word, but it's the truth.
They identify with it.
Yes, they do. Yeah. And they come up and they say, I felt so upset for Lewis, and I was so...
BT Dub, by the way, she just said Lewis. She does it too on occasion. I try to always stick with Louis, but his name is Lewis, and to the English.
I would have comforted him if I'd been there. And I know with that quest...
What is it that makes them identify with him? I mean, obviously you have given them value.
Well, I identify with them when I'm writing.
Yeah.
I'm totally involved with them, obviously. And I cannot really write about a villain for too long without trying to find the good side of that villain.
Boy, she is not lying there either, right? Like, she does it with even the baddest of the baddies in her books. They always end up having some reasons, some sympathy.
And the side that will confuse us as we try to make a judgment.
And the good side is the battle they have with what they do.
Yes, or the fact that they could have been good people if this hadn't happened. Yeah,
if they hadn't been swept up into...
Or if they hadn't been seduced by a concept that sounded irresistible, but is really a nightmare.
This picks up after the debacle that ended The Witching Hour. You know, did you know that when you ended The Witching Hour that you were going to pick up on this story?
No, I thought The Witching Hour was my best ending to date. I ended the novel with a hero, Michael, in doubt about what had happened, not knowing if he'd been a dupe of the witches or he was a free agent. Right. And I thought it was a wonderful ending. And then all of a sudden came these voices saying, you know, we have to know what happened to Rowan.
Now, what voices were they? Voices that your
readers.
Own
no, readers.
I don't remember this at all either. That's super surprising to me. The end of The Witching Hour is very satisfying, but it also, like, clearly leaves a million things hanging. It felt like she had a next story in mind. Absolutely, the first time I read that. I assume Lasher already existed, I think, the first time that I read it. Well, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it was after 93. So Lasher was already out. Taltos was not. I was there in line day one for Taltos later on.
You know, so I began to think about a sequel, and it was really quite a while before the sequel came to me, before I saw it, before I saw the inevitable progression.
I must touch on this before I forget about it. Do you resent that Gothic novelists are not, in some cases, you make millions of dollars and you sell millions of copies. And so writing this has made you rich and popular and well-known and respected. But still, there seems to be a little bit of not having the same kind of acceptance that you would have if you were writing series fiction.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's past as well, and I think Anne was a huge part of putting that in the past. Her novels have always striven for, high literature, even though the subjects have been, dime store novels ideas. She put Sam Spade of Vampires. She put the Sam Spade of Vampires in the middle of the literary discussion. Pretty impressive achievement.
What say you, Ms. Rice?
I think that's past. I really do.
You do?
Because these novels are simply too weird to be classified in any specific way. They're obviously not science fiction. They're not gothic fiction.
Right.
They're not really horror fiction.
But they do call you gothic novelists. Some do.
Some do.
But they don't know what they're talking about, you're saying.
Yeah, well, not too often anymore.
Well, the New York Times.
Did they do that?
Boop, boop, boop.
They probably did. But even they don't call me that every time,
Yes, no, I think there was one magazine piece. But you believe, and clearly the acceptance shown in terms of the book sale, you don't worry about whether you think that they have accepted you or accepted the genre.
It's really the readers. It's the readers coming up.
I think she got readers among the elites too, among that sort of like critic class. I think a lot of those were her readers because her novels are so high-minded.
Over and over again and saying, we love this book, or this got me through.
It touched me, or it made me.
Yeah, exactly. Or I was really swept up in this. Or it's sometimes very simple statements like, you made me care about a vampire. I really cared what was going to happen to this character.
And when you hear that, you feel good.
Yeah, I feel like the book's being received.
One small little controversy, Tom Cruise.
Who?
Tom Cruise.
Okay. This is before the 94 movie came out. I think this is before, we'll see in just a second. I think this is before she had actually seen the film. And before she saw the film, she hated the idea of Tom Cruise as Lestat. She didn't really love Brad Pitt either, but she was particularly angry about the casting of Tom Cruise. Famously, after the movie was finished, she got a copy of it on VHS, got to watch it at home like before it came out. And she took out full-page ads in, I think, like the New York Times and an LA paper too, at least in New York and LA, but I think she did it all over the country. And just like full page ads where she was just raving about the film and what a wonderful adaptation it was. I think the same would have been true for the TV show on AMC. Anne passed away before the TV show was available to her. She never got to see any finished product. She and Christopher had walked away from the project because of the changes that they had made. In particular, I think that moving the timeline, I don't think it was the color change for Louis. A lot of people will point to that haven't watched the show. I don't think that was Anne's problem. I do think she probably didn't want him to be a pimp. And I do think that the timeline was a problem for her, the timeline shift. I also think more than that, it was about the fact that they didn't want Christopher's scripts. Christopher had written a screenplay or two for the episodes, and I think the idea was that they wanted him to be in the room. Whether that was just to protect her legacy or whether she wanted to give Christopher a good shot at the business as far as like becoming a screenwriter, I don't know. But regardless, I think the AMC adaptations are amazing. And I think if Anne had lived to see them, I think that she would have said so. I think that she'd be ranting and raving about them now. Let's hear how she responded to Tom Cruise in '93.
Cruise?
Oh, yeah,
and
Tom
is going to
Cruise.
play Lestat?
Yeah, he is. Apparently he is.
Neil
Yes.
Jordan is directing.
Yes.
This is Interview with a Vampire. After 20 years, it's being made into a movie?
At last.
Yeah, and how did it finally happen?
Well, it's such a long story
don't
about
tell
that, how it's been on the shelf and on the shelf. But
Yeah.
David Geffen is the producer of
Well,
the
there you
moment.
go. That's all
and
you need to
David
know.
Geffen wants to make it. He's
Yeah.
very committed to making it.
And he's committed to Cruise because he believes.
Apparently. I haven't
Yeah.
really discussed
Can
that
you
with him.
imagine Cruise as Lestat?
Not at all.
No shade, but no, he ain't Lestat. Tom, by the way, I think he did a great job. There are things that we've picked apart on Tom's performance, and obviously the chemistry was just not there between Tom and Brad. And I think that literally comes down to the time and place where they were making it. I think both of them were, at the peak of their careers effectively, and it was a Hollywood which was very homophobic, honestly. And even a project like, they had talked before this, they had talked about Cher playing Louis, so it could have been worse.
Not at all. Tom Cruise is a good actor.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. He was great in Born on the 4th of July, but he is so not the type for Lestat that it's almost unimaginable. I can't conceive of what's going to happen. But there are other wonderful things about the movie. Neil Jordan being the first and foremost, and then Brad Pitt starring as Louis. That's a young, extremely talented actor who will probably do a really memorable job with that role. The Tom Cruise thing, you know, Neil Jordan perhaps has a vision that he can realize there. I mean, I really respect the man.
She was nastier than that in other places. It's clear there, though, that like she was not for Tom. She was over the moon for Neil Jordan at the time, and I think that is the thing. I think in retrospect, the two that deserve the most applause for that '94 film and all that's good about it are David Geffen and Neil Jordan. Neil Jordan had a vision, and he absolutely put that on screen. We said when we did our commentary that Kirsten won the movie, and she did, but Neil and David Geffen came out smelling like roses too.
So I'm hoping he'll pull it off. The readers are devastated. Just let me say that. They're
There's
devastated.
a real controversy brewing over
Coast to coast.
Anne Rice, Lasher is her new novel. It's a pleasure to have you. She moved back to New Orleans in 1988, where she lives with her husband, the man who's having this great love affair of a long time, Stan Rice, who teaches literature. Great to have you. I hope we can do this again.
Thank you very much.
And then I'll ask why you... So did I. Anne Rice, see you next time. Thank you for joining us.
All right. I love that. I really enjoyed that. I hope you did too. Charlie asks good questions. They've got a good rapport. It is very funny in retrospect to see her kind of putting it off on the the fans are so upset about Tom Cruise coast to coast. They are apoplectic. I think that was probably true at the time. I do know there was a tremendous amount of controversy about his casting, not just her, but the fan base was not super excited and on board for it too. But we have to remember the exponential increase in the fan base that came because of the 94 movie. You know, I was a little baby Anne Rice fan like the year before. I started reading either the summer of 92 or the summer of 93. I think it was 93. But I read everything that was available except for her erotica, because I was 12. I read everything that was available at that point. And then the word about the movie started breaking, and it was in all the magazines. And I remember going and reading like Fangoria magazine coverage. For instance, the shot from the movie where Santiago is cut in half, I saw that as like the mannequin and the special effects thing in Fangoria like a year before the movie came out, which was crazy in retrospect that they were putting out images like that. But anyway, I really enjoyed that. I hope you did too. And it's interesting to look back and watch Anne's own sort of thought process and the way that she discusses her characters and books change as the years go by. So the next one is from 95, and we'll be covering that. My co-host, actually, Ashley, is going to cover that video. So stay tuned for that here on the channel. Subscribe if you like Anne Rice or Vampire Chronicles content. We do the Articulate Coven podcast every Sunday, and that is right here on the channel as well, or you can listen to us anywhere that you listen to podcasts. Until I talk to you the next time, have a great day.